We are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about the future of Grand Seiko and Seiko in 2020. I recently did a video where I talked about the future of watches and the watch industry in general, but I mostly talked about the major Swiss brands and holding companies, and someone out there left in a comment and someone actually in a message saying, hey, why didn't you talk about Seiko? They're one of the largest producers, if not the largest by now, producers of watches in general. Why did you leave them out? So today we're going to be talking about them, and it's very interesting, some of the things that I found in their investor relations documents. But once again, thank you so much for coming back for another episode. I really do appreciate it. Please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. It can be your Christmas gift from you to me. No, but really, it does keep me making videos for you. And of course, you can check out delraywatch.com, where we just got in so many cool new watches, anywhere from the Seiko Alpinist, the blue dial especially for Hodinkee, all the way up to some very high-end watches if that's what you're into. On my wrist today, Rolex 16550 Transitional Explorer 2, you know the model, and Instagram, The Real John P. Let's put that all aside. Let's talk about it. Seiko and Grand Seiko in 2020 and into the future. So Seiko is a Japanese company, right? They've been out for a very long time now. They've got a lot of rich history, and they have some high-end watches, including the Grand Seiko and the Crador lines. That being said, as a cultural thing, their documentation, what they provide to their investors, to the public out there on the internet, is incredibly strong from a corporate standpoint. It's very numbers driven, it's very specific, it's very precise, and they're modeling out in the form of 6-year periods. So it looks like they go in 6-year periods to kind of model out into the future, and I find that incredibly interesting, and it's a little bit different than kind of the Richemont Swatch documents, which are very emotional and marketing driven. But Seiko is all about the numbers, and their numbers are pretty strong. So interestingly enough, in their documentation, I'll say straight away that their president talks specifically about, and he's even been quoted in interviews talking about how the affordable models, the affordable watches that they produce, that segment has been shrinking comparatively to the upper end or the mid-market upper end, which is where Grand Seiko and some of their more higher end watches like the Presage line, the Prestige, the Prospects, that kind of area. So they're looking not necessarily to get away from the more approachable models, including the SKXs and some of the now defunct Seiko 5s and their replacements. As you notice, the replacement to some of the Seiko 5 divers have gone into the higher end price point, I believe in the $500 to $600 range, and that's not even getting into the Prospects line. That gets into the thousands of dollars, and that's not even touching Grand Seiko. So going back to before, when Grand Seiko was really the pinnacle of the Seiko lineup, and they still had the Seiko on the dial, there was much more of a price disparity than there is today, where you see that bottom end of the Seiko coming up to meet the ultimate high end of the brand, which is supposed to be Grand Seiko. So it's interesting to note that in the future, including 2020, we're going to see Seiko focus a lot more on this mid segment for them, but also that upper segment. And we see it also in the marketing campaigns, right? You go out on YouTube, you go into stores, even advertising, and Grand Seiko is marketing heavily their latest creations. For example, they have their Seasons line, which retails for about $6,300 or $6,400 US, which is upmarket, right? It's a little bit lower than something like a Rolex Submariner, but it's in par with something like an Omega or a Zenith. So they're really going after that middle luxury watch segment, which is also something interestingly enough that's happening in the automobile industry, right? I like to kind of compare different industries because it's really telling of the times and of the consumers that exist in the global market today in that specific mid-upper market segment, something like a Mercedes C-Class or a BMW 3 Series, that attainable true luxury type of product. So that's what Grand Seiko's doing, and honestly, they're doing a very great job with it, and that's why there's a lot of buzz. So wrapping that back up into what Seiko is doing as a whole, you can look specifically at their motto, right? It's interesting. They're a Japanese company. I don't know everything about the way that, Japanese culture, the way that they handle companies, but at least according to the way that the Grand Seiko and Seiko handles doing corporate business, they do have a bit of a more, wholesome unity approach to it. And what I mean by that is it looks like they have a little bit more stronger core values than at least what I'm seeing from their Swiss counterparts. So they do have a bit of a slogan, right? They have a company slogan, which is moving ahead, touching hearts. And they have actually a theme song. They paid some popular Japanese singer, and she sang this song, and you can hear it on their website. I want to put it in here, but I think I'll probably get a strike from YouTube with the way that all of this copyright content is coming down with the ban hammer from the YouTube higher ups. But nonetheless, there's a song, you can listen to it. I don't know anything they're talking about, but it sounds really nice. But the whole premise is they're moving ahead and they're touching hearts. And you can see that also from the brands. And they talk about it in their investor relations documents. So let me explain also what I mean by this. When you think of Seiko through previous times in history, they were a real clear-cut watch brand. They sold watches meant to be used, and some might even have considered them disposable in the past, right? Approachable watches that you can wear, you can beat up, not be afraid to do so. But there wasn't heavy marketing pairing with celebrities. It was Seiko, and it served a certain place for a certain type of consumer. Now you go to their websites, you have certain things, certain types of marketing that is a little bit more personal, right? A little bit edgy. Things like Grand Seiko and Seiko, they have certain celebrities out there, not necessarily in the U.S. market, but certainly in other markets where they're tied along celebrities, a little bit more marketing, a little bit more of that personal touch. That is probably what they feel. I'll interject my opinion. It probably is what they feel that they're missing to gain more of that mid-market segment, which is how brands like Omega have done so successfully in the past by tying into pop culture. So that's where Seiko and Grand Seiko is going. Now, what does this mean necessarily for us as collectors? Well, one thing is that they're strengthening their e-commerce as well as their boutiques predominantly overseas for them, which is in the U.S. market. You can go to a Seiko boutique in the Design District area of Miami, which was unheard of years ago, right? A Seiko store where they sell high-end Grand Seikos along some of the best from Richemont, unheard of. And Grand Seiko and the Seiko does not feel out of place there. In other parts of the world, there's other types of Seiko stores as well. So for us as watch geeks, the watches are becoming more expensive from the brand, but they're also becoming better. They're also listening to us as watch geeks and coming out with new watches and models that we are really demanding as a watch community based on how we're acting with other brands and our spending habits in that type of way. And also, they're just getting stronger on social media and e-commerce. So for us, perfect here, like at Del Rey Watch, we understand it. Other brands out there understand it. Omega's doing it as well. Certain Richemont brands are getting into that segment. And in my previous video, I talked about that as well. So it could be something interesting for us as watch geeks and collectors to look at Seiko, and the typical Seiko/Grand Seiko collector, I feel, might be let down a little bit with Seiko's current kind of reworking of their trajectory, right? It seems like they as a company, as a corporation, a multinational, are trying to fit the mold of what they think the watch community is really looking for today, whereas I would say the Seiko community, up until recent times, has really been almost a connected but separate community. You know what I mean? So more to the basics, more tool watches, more about the essence of it actually being a watch and having certain production qualities than having it being tied to mainstream pop culture. We work with a lot of dealers and a lot of collectors and geeks here, and even some dealers, and that seems to be the type of person that's drawn to Seiko and Grand Seiko. Someone that cares about the basics, cares about the movement, the primitive, and not necessarily about who's wearing it or what they're doing in pop culture or how popular it is. And so I think it'll be extremely interesting to see how this plays out in their 6 to 7 year plan, see if more casuals start buying into the Grand Seiko name, as well as if they can actually pull consumers away from brands that Swatch has, Omega, Richemont, and Rolex into their brand lineup because of this pop culture play and e-commerce play that they're making. And I'm also extremely curious to see if they lose any long-term loyal brand customers because they've pushed their products up a little bit more into the market, as well as they've raised the retail prices on their higher end pieces that are no longer as approachable for that high-end watch as it used to be, including the sports watches and the autumn and the spring and the summer, the seasons lineup from Grand Seiko. I want to know your opinions about this because I know Seiko and Grand Seiko collectors are some of the most opinionated, and I absolutely love to hear it. So make sure to leave in the comments below. Also, if you have anything to chime in, love to hear that as well. Do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Even if you did not like this video, hey, a little bit of karma can go a long way, right? Anyway, guys, back to work for me. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.